College football awards voting has always been baffling, bordering on nonsensical. I guess I should have known that might apply to recruiting camps as well. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. This is the Podcast Daily. It is Wednesday, and I need the expert to weigh in. I just was so puzzled, Berm. Every day, the Elite 11 was posting updates. Tavien St. Clair, he wins this drill. Tavien St. Clair, he wins that drill. He's number one after day one. He's number one after day two. But he's not the MVP of the Elite 11. So, again, it's probably something that really doesn't matter, but it's just something that I don't understand.
I don't think anyone understands it, to be honest. I'm trying to find the criteria, what it says to win. Generally speaking, they say that the Elite 11 is an award given based on a handful of things. One of them is like your high school film. One of them is other criteria. They don't even say what it is.
Well, what a big loophole.
It's film, traits, camp performance into the rankings. And unfortunately for Tavien, because he plays in Ohio, and this is where I'm going to get on the soapbox again, Ohio is so averse to 7-on-7 football. The final day of the Elite 11 is basically a 15-minute 7-on-7 window where each quarterback has a team, kids you've never played with before, etc., and you have 15 minutes of running that offense. And he was like 11 of 20 in that setting, which is something he's played 7-on-7 like twice on a national scene, a national level, where in Texas they have like 7-on-7 leagues and championships. And Keelan Russell, the quarterback at Duncanville High School, who's very, very good. It's not mean to knock him. He was number 2 behind Tavien on day 1, day 2 from the Elite 11's official rankings. He is better at that, and Tavien, did not have his best day doing that, and that apparently weighs a little bit heavier than it should. Plus, I think again, it's the competition level of being at Bell Fountain versus being at Duncanville High School in Dallas, which might be the most talented high school team in the country. So it's unfortunate, but I think that Tavien went there and did exactly what he wanted to do and acquitted himself very nicely. He won the accuracy challenge, which is the second time this year where he's been out west. He went to an event in Las Vegas around the Super Bowl and a quarterback event out there, the NFL's Young Guns or whatever it was, and won the accuracy challenge there, won the accuracy challenge at the Elite 11. Obviously, he continues to impress people. He was like 247 Sports alpha dog for the entire tournament. And in a lot of ways, not to besmirch the Elite 11's official rankings, because I think those people do a great job. It's a situation where I actually prefer the guys who are watching players all year round and their rankings and 247's rankings, and Andrew Ivins, their national director of scouting at 247, who does a really great job, had Tavien as his top guy. And I think that you're going to see probably when they re-rank the national rankings for 247 in the next month or two, that Tavien will very likely be number 1 in their overall rankings.
So I've never been to the finals. I've only been to some of the regional camps. You've covered it. You were not there for this one last weekend. I've always just had this like sneaking suspicion, and the criteria that you laid out, I think makes me feel that even more, that like they determine it in advance. Like if they took the 7-on-7 and that was like where the MVP slipped away from Tavien St. Clair, I guess I could understand that, but it doesn't sound like that's even one of the primary criteria. If they're looking at film and traits and attitude, that would seem like all those things would work in his favor. Maybe not tape. I don't know. You tell me, Burnham. Like he played
his
well
tape's
last
fine.
year.
His tape's great. His tape is against Division 3, Division 4 in Ohio, not against the best athletes in the world like Keelan Russell is in Texas. I think the problem you run into is that, yes, a lot of times these camps, things are predetermined. I'll never forget back, I think it was the summer of 2014, Ohio State had one of the camps for the opening on campus there back when schools were still allowed to host them. And a 5-star running back was visiting for the camp. He had a broken foot, could not participate, but had to show up at the camp to still get an invitation to the opening. So all the kids who went there and participated and ran and did all the things, and different kids win running back MVP, that kid still got invited to the opening and the MVP didn't. Like, that's the way this works. A lot of these companies, and again, I understand why they do it, but the Under Armour camps, even the rivals camps, even especially the camps that Nike used to run in battle 7-on-7 stuff. It is designed to promote the companies and not necessarily the players. Now, again, the Elite 11 is truly really, really good for quarterbacks, and they work those guys very hard. And again, Keelan Russell was the number 2 ranked player on day 1 and day 2, but I can't imagine that you would weight it enough based on Keelan Russell winning day 3 and Tavien St. Clair being ranked number 4 on day 3 or whatever to overturn it. But it is what it is. I mean, there's certainly been times in the past when Ohio State's players, CJ Stroud won the Elite 11 finals and did not go into that event as a favorite or a guy that people knew anything about. So it's not always that way. But again, Tavien St. Clair, the goal was to go in there and make sure people nationally had woken up to what he's capable of, and that is certainly the case. And it's making things very difficult for Ohio State recruiting the class of 2026 quarterbacks, to be honest.
Really? Why is that?
Because no one wants to play behind Tavien St. Clair and Julian Sayin, apparently. Ohio State's offered 12 quarterbacks in the class of 2026. For reference, they only offered 4 in the class of 2025, Tavien St. Clair and Ryan Montgomery being 2 of them. So they've offered 12 quarterbacks in that class. 9 of them have committed elsewhere, and I think 7 of them have committed elsewhere in the last 2 weeks. Almost all of those kids were on campus at Ohio State. Almost all of them worked side by side with Tavien St. Clair and had a chance to, but it's very similar right now to what happened in the 2023 recruiting cycle for Ohio State, where the Buckeyes had a roster when people were being recruited that included CJ Stroud, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, and Devin Brown, and no one wanted to come in. And it didn't happen until a month before signing day that Lincoln Kienholz committed to Ohio State after the Buckeyes had moved on from Brock Glenn. So it's going to be a weird cycle, but for the confidence from Ohio State perspective, they know full well what they have in Tavien St. Clair, and now the rest of the country does too.
Do you think anything will have to change with the way Ohio State? We talk a lot, certainly in spring camp. We're going to be talking about it in a couple of weeks with training camp, with the number of reps for Will Howard, Devin Brown, managing a roster that has 5 scholarship starting quarterbacks. How much do you need to get for Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland? How much work does Lincoln Kienholz need? We talk about that with the current roster all the time. How do you think that there's going to have to be any shift at all with quarterback recruiting because of the things you mentioned? If you keep stacking them one after the other, which is literally the best thing you can do, especially in the portal era, like all you can do is keep giving yourself as many chances as possible that one connects and that as many stay. Maybe I'm stepping on your toes there with the answer, but like, do you have to change any part of the philosophy on a year in, year out basis if you're Ryan Day or Chip Kelly with quarterbacks now?
Yeah, and probably. I mean, Lincoln Riley and Dabo Swinney have both had that approach in the last probably 5 years where they go really big national guy one year and then maybe a developmental guy the next, really big, then developmental, because that way you're staggering and stacking the class a little bit different from an alignment standpoint. Ryan Day's philosophy has always been, we are going to recruit the absolute best of the best. And if you can't hack it, you can't hack it. Now, we've seen even at wide receiver, and we talked about this in the Rooster show on Monday, there's a shift in philosophy happening there for Brian Hartline, realizing that if you want Jeremiah Smith, and everyone does, in NIL world, portal world, like this is not a true to life salary cap situation because kids aren't signing contracts. Like Jeremiah Smith is going to have to be re-recruited in December and January of this year because everyone in the country is going to come after him with wide open bank accounts. And that's going to be really, really difficult. And if you're Ohio State, you need to have an ability to compete in that field. The Buckeyes have done a great job in the last year, especially with NIL. But as we move towards the profit sharing model and the revenue sharing model, like you're going to have a salary cap. You're going to need to be able to place guys in it. And then whatever they figure out on their own NIL wise is great. Hopefully the NCAA finds a way to actually put some guardrails up around that, because it's going to get chaotic if the team is thinking, if the schools are thinking, okay, we did our part and now just any random booster can come in and provide extra money. Like things are going to get pretty weird.
Yeah.
You have to change philosophy, bottom line.
Yeah. So I know that you have talked with Ryan Day about this before, and I've asked him about it in press conference settings and have conversations with him as well. It's like, in that staggering mode, that helps you build like a long-term backup, somebody that you might think might stay for 4 or 5 years, an Ohio guy. I'm not talking about Tavien St. Clair here in any way, shape, or form, but like somebody else who you might have in the program for 4 or 5 years, and Ryan Day's always said no, because it's like, I don't want somebody who doesn't think that they can win the starting job. That's the part where I feel like once in a while, maybe you need to find one of those, because it gives you more long-term flexibility, even if they're not a starter. And that seems to be the most difficult part for Ryan Day he doesn't want to adjust to it. And I don't know if he ever will, but it does feel like there's a part of me that thinks he needs to.
Yeah. Ironically, I think when the 2025 recruiting cycle started, there was a belief in Ohio State and in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center among the coaches that the 2025 cycle was going to be the one that allowed them to do that, because they had 2 guys in the state, in Tavien St. Clair and Ryan Montgomery, that they felt like, hey, these are development guys. They're going to take a couple years to get there. They're going to be kids who will stay in the state and won't transfer. And we can figure out which one of those 2 is going to be the best fit and then go from there. And then Tavien St. Clair became a 5-star and everyone's goo goo gaga over him. So now that conversation changes again. They have been desperately looking for an in-state quarterback because they knew that someone was going to have to be that guy. And it's easier to find that developmental guy from in the state, because even as we've seen at Ohio State in the last few years at other positions, developmental guys at wide receiver, for example, if they're not from the Midwest, they still want to leave. They still want to transfer. They still, hey, you still get homesick if you're not playing. I think it actually does. It sets up Ohio State in an interesting position for 2026 now, as we've already talked about. But a guy like Nathan Bernard at Ashland High School, who is a 6'6", 240-pound quarterback, is Ohio State's seen him a lot. They like him, but hasn't really made a move on him because they weren't sure exactly where things were going to fall in that class. And now with a number of top targets coming off the board, and like, I wonder if Bernard has an opportunity to become that guy in the class of 2026. The problem for Ohio State is that anytime you recruit a player, other schools are going to say, Nathan, you're a 4-star quarterback. Why would you not come here and play? And they're still going to play against Ohio State as though the Buckeyes are stacking the deck and you're never going to play. So you don't want to recruit a kid that can't play at Ohio State, but you also need to be able to convince players that the best thing for them sometimes is waiting to play. And that's not easy to do when you have coaches, especially like Penn State, Michigan State, Kentucky, Cincinnati, who's saying you can come here and play as a freshman, maybe not start as a freshman, but you can play and develop. Like it does become a different approach. And I don't know that Ryan Day should change his approach. I think they should, but if we've learned one thing about Ryan in the time covering him, is that he can be fairly stubborn.
But
he knows what he wants, and he's proven it at quarterback. So it's hard to argue.
He's also showing selective stubbornness, I think. He's got a willingness to change in some areas, and we saw that a lot this offseason. And in some, he doesn't. Quarterback is probably one where he's going to dig his feet in because he knows more about that than just about anybody in college football. What you talked about with Tavien St. Clair in 2025, and he could have been the in-state backup, the change in the conversation with him is fascinating to me, because it's not just you talking about it. It's not just local media. This was Bruce Feldman talking to people leaving the Elite 11. Said, quote, "I think he's a more gifted passer than Dylan Raiola by a little bit. Dylan was more casual and cool. He looked like a grown man, but you could tell had watched hours and hours of Patrick Mahomes and was like this big middle infielder slinging it around. Tavien looked more intentional. I think Tavien had the best arm here. I think his arm's a little better than Raiola's, and he'll be under less of a microscope in his situation. He can make some mistakes without everyone looking for him to be the savior of the program without a lot of good players around him. He's an anomaly. He's from an hour away from Ohio State, one of the greatest schools in the history of the game, and he's never had a personal QB coach. He's done it in a way I haven't heard about in like 20 years. Those are 3 different quotes about him. I ran them all together. But that just seems, I don't know how you feel about it. I guess I'll ask. That's would have seemed like preposterous to have that conversation about him 2 years ago.
Yeah, but it would be. But I'm glad people, I don't know if people have watched our stuff over the last couple of years, but I've said all those things. Like, this is a different type of kid. Like, he is a different type than we have seen. The point about not having a personal quarterback coach, like, he's had offers to go elsewhere. He's had plenty of people around the state of Ohio and nationally who have reached out to work with him. He has chosen to stay close to home at Bellefontaine to work with Jake Kennedy, his quarterback coach and offensive coordinator at Bellefontaine, because he just really trusts Jake Kennedy. He is a kid that the first time I interviewed Tavien was after his freshman year of high school. We went there and we basically talked about baseball and how much, I was talking about how natural he is just as a passer. And he was topping out at almost 90 miles an hour as a freshman on the bump. So like, you knew that he had special arm talent, but then when you combine that with the work ethic that he's shown the last 18 months, going from 6'3" and 170 pounds as a freshman to 6'4" and now 232 pounds heading into his senior year. When you look at the ability that he has to come to Ohio State whenever he wants, I mean, he spent the entire week of his spring break in Ohio State's practice facility, working with Chip Kelly, being in meetings. Like, the reason Ryan Day has been wanting and waiting for an in-state quarterback like this to develop is because there are the extra pieces that you haven't been able to get from other quarterbacks. You have not been able to get the extra time with CJ Stroud when he was recruited, or Justin Fields when he was transferring in, or even Kyle McCord from Philadelphia, which is not that far away. This is a unique situation. And there was zero pressure on Tavien, but now there is. I mean, he's a 5-star quarterback and may very well end up being the number 1 player in the country. And when you put those expectations on people, he's going to feel a little bit more pressure, but he is extremely cool. He is extremely humble. And the fact is, if he has a bad weekend or if he has a bad day at Ohio State, he can drive 35, 40 minutes and get home and have some home cooking for mom and be able to settle in. Like, there's a lot of things about this that set up very, very nicely. And I've said it a few times over the last month and a half, but like, there's Justin Fields as far as like a prospect, like, coming out of high school, what you see and what you think you're going to get out of him. And then there's Tavien St. Clair, and there's nobody else in my mind that's even been close at Ohio State. Like, in that goes for Julian Sayin, that goes for CJ Stroud, that goes for Kyle McCord, Braxton Miller obviously is a different level athlete, but what the full package of Tavien St. Clair is truly, like, it has a chance to be, to pardon the pun for what we were talking about earlier in the show, but like elite.
Yeah. So you've been covering him for going on 3 years. Do you have to guess how he responds to not winning Elite 11 MVP? Do you think he cares? Do you think it becomes a motivation factor for him? Do you think he understands that there's enough respect from other coaches, people who watch the Elite 11, that's good enough instead of the place of a trophy? Like, how do you think he'll respond to it?
I don't think it's a stretch to say all those things are true. But how much weight you give to each individual pillar is certainly going to vary day to day. I know Tavien, he flew back from California straight to Columbus, started his official visit Monday morning after his official visit's over, right back in the gym at 5:30 a.m. Like, he's not, working with his team, helping his younger brother, who's going to be his backup quarterback. Like, he is not wired like everyone else, but he will say the right things. When you talk to him about it, I'm sure everyone who talked to him about it out there, he said, yes, sir, no, sir. And I understand. And I'll continue to get better. But I also know Tavien well enough to know that he believes he's the best quarterback in the country. And he's believed that for the last year plus. And now he's getting a chance to prove it. And I think that any opportunity you have to go ahead and add some fuel to the fire for a kid that has every reason to have the fire like waning a little bit after the last year and a half, and how he's been on this rocket ship, like anything else to get a little extra fuel to that, he will definitely use. And I am confident Ohio State will use it as well.
Maybe it'll just be an early introduction to the inane reality of college football awards voting, which is the dumbest, I think, probably in all of sports. But don't worry, watch list season is coming, and we'll talk about it a lot in the month of July. We're almost there as the last week of June winds along. We got a couple more episodes to go this week. Berm and I will talk on Thursday on the Podcast Daily about some interesting rankings that are coming out about the Buckeyes and the Horseshoe. And then we're going to need your help again. We're going to dip into the Freaky Friday mailbag. So we'll send out an alert on that on subtext. And that'll get us through the end of the week. Probably a little bit more recruiting action coming your way. And Berm will, of course, have that covered as he always does. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday edition of the Podcast Daily. He is Berm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.